Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Scamballeri. I'm the WA State Manager for Rural and Regional Banking at Bankwest. And on behalf of Planfarm Bankwest, it's my privilege to invite you to the 8th edition of our benchmarking survey. We have over 550 sets of data, and every year that I've stood up here, the commitment that we've given is that we will increase the sample size each year. And having over 550 sets of data makes this the most comprehensive benchmarking study of its kind in the whole country. So it's both with pleasure and pride that we bring this to you today. Some of the key findings in the report: the average return on capital for farmers over the last financial year was 8.2%, which is pretty good in anyone's language. But consider this: the top 25% of farmers had a return on capital of over 15% through the last year. Now, coming back to benchmarking, and you must consider that some of the top farmers and some of the middle performing farmers were actually experiencing the same conditions. It was different management that led to the different results. And benchmarking is one of the most powerful ways to measure and improve your performance. It really is. Shows you where you can ask questions and build on that. I'd like to call on Graeme McConnell, Director of Planfarm, to run through the findings of this year's report.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Thank you, Minister John, for your introductions. So, okay, why are we here? Well, hopefully it's to gain a bit of an update as to where ag is at, but it's more importantly to see that there are actually some really good news stories in agriculture, and when they come along, I think we should celebrate them. It was actually a pretty good year, but it was one of those years that, whilst it started very, very well, we had an incredibly long dry period, about 6 weeks leading up until about mid-July, that left us really in that balance. There was a lot of crop that could have, and livestock as well, from the livestock point of view, that could have gone either way in about mid-July. So from mid-July onwards, we could have had a drought, but as it was, we actually had one of the kindest finishes I think most of us can remember. And we've ended up with a pretty good result, both production-wise and price-wise. The last thing I want to talk about with the variation in rainfall is that we often talk about high rainfall, medium rainfall and low rainfall, but when you actually put together a histogram of the numbers of people in each of the rainfall zones and look at the rainfall actually achieved last year, just 2013, there's actually a number of low rainfall farmers that have actually received quite a bit more rain than some of the high rainfall farmers. So we need to be careful about some of our measures about saying, okay, you're in a high rainfall zone, you've got to have generated X amount of dollars per hectare. It's got to be a little bit more scientific about that. So maybe some of the return on capital measures are better, or measures that we've used in our single year data, which is operating profit per hectare per millimetre of rainfall. 2013, along with 2011, are the only 2 years where even the bottom 25% has actually averaged a profit. 2013 and 2011 were very good years across the whole of the state. So the top 25% in 2008 and 2011 were dominated by the northern parts of the state. It's a good part of the reason why we use the multiple year data set, because it pulls all of that back into line. Let's look at our debt to income ratios. The blue line refers to the debt to income, and we're actually getting that back to about 1.2 to 1. Now, for those who are numbers people, which I hope is quite a few of you, that's probably also in the ballpark of where we want to see it. It's actually getting quite sustainable, but on the back of relatively high incomes, which is reflected in the green line. Our yields from last year, when compared to the 10-year average, were very good. Probably the standout's been the barley, and I think that reflects once again the impact that it was actually the southern regions of the state that actually performed pretty well. And so the barley there's nearly 1.5 times our 10-year average. The operating surpluses, we can see the performance of the L1, 2 zones are actually quite poor, but the vast majority of the rest of the state performed really, really well. So the operating surplus is the orange, operating cost of the green, the total of the bars is the total income that these businesses have received. So when you look at that, this shows to me that that's a really consistent result, except for those very low rainfall northern wheat belt farmers. Let's get into the multiple year data set. Now, this is looking at client performance over an extended period of time, 6 years. Return on capital of the top 25%. We'll focus a lot on the top 25%. We mentioned before in that very first slide that I put up about it being an average of 8%, so that's their average 8% return on capital. And you can see that with the exception of the L1-2 zone, most zones are actually just a little bit below that, but they're actually holding up pretty well. I guess what it's saying is that the top 25% don't generate massive profits every year, but when they do get the opportunity to, they really take advantage of it. And what you'll also see out of this slide is that they really generate losses between what the top 25% do and what the average do. Rainfall group. In 2006 and 7, that L1-2 zone had 2 droughts. They just come off 2 droughts and it was pretty dire straits, pretty much dire straits up there. 2008, they generated a 41% return on capital. In 2011, a 23% return on capital. Of course, this year they're fairly poor at 6%. So that region has had an outstanding run of seasons. But most of the rest get 1 to 2 years of greater than a 10% return on capital in 6. They're getting 1 or 2 that are probably not too far away from that. They're getting the odd loss year and the rest are around that average. So my reading of this is the key to being in the top 25% farmer is you don't make a loss in the poor years. You absolutely get all the pig in the good years if you get the chance, and in the good average years you've got to make a good average profit. The differences are between the top 25% and the average is that, and I've just picked out wheat yield because that, as you saw before, is a dominant enterprise. The difference in the top 25% over the group is only actually about 0.08 of a tonne. Now last year's rolling numbers, if you remember, that was actually about 0.1 of a tonne, so it's 0.02 different. But it's actually not a lot of grain. And when you actually calculate that out, 0.08 of a tonne at $250 a tonne net on farm, thereabouts, is only about 20 bucks a hectare. So the difference in the operating costs of the top 25% group of farmers compared to the average, it's only about $18 a hectare lower operating costs. So yes, they're generating more yield with lower operating costs, but they're not actually big numbers that we're talking about. So if you add the two of those together, we're up to 38. And then we look at the grain prices, and because I focused on wheat yield, we'll focus on wheat prices. There's actually not a lot of difference in grain yield. So if you calculate that through, $3 a tonne on the average wheat yield, which is just over 2 tonne in the 6-year group, is about $6 a hectare. So you add that, we're up to about $44 a hectare difference that's derived from those 3 elements we've just looked at. The difference in equity gain that we've had between our average clients, and I'll just focus on the state average, and the top 25% is about $1,186,000. So top 25% clients have gained $1,186,000 more in equity than what the average have. And when you calculate out that $44 a hectare over about 4,000 hectares, sorry for the numbers, over the 6 years, that works out to about $1,056,000 of gain. So what I'm saying is that those 3 things, the wheat yield, wheat price and operating costs, are contributing to probably 80 or 90% of the difference that we're seeing between our top 25% of farmers and our average. But that brings to a close the data that I actually wanted to talk about. But what I'd like to do is just to refocus on some of those core messages, and that is that 2013 as a production year and a price year really fed into being a great result for our farmers. In the long-term data set, the differences between the top 25% and the average are basically small, and I think they're largely management defined. And I was also going to use that quote from about page 25, Minister, as well, which is that farming in the right hands can make for a very good investment as well. So I think that brings to a close what I would like to talk about. Thank you.